He's talking to the Jews about Jewish matters that interest the Jews even of those days. And he's doing that on Mount of Olives. That's why it's called the Olivet Discourse. On the top of Mount of Olives, he sat down and with his disciples, and by the way, he was not angry with their questions. You know, he understood exactly where they come from. And he took his time to give them a detailed answer. In the first verses of 4 to 31, he's speaking to the Jews about the future of the Jews. But then, starting from verse 32, he is giving them also a different perspective of what's going to happen while it is going to happen to the Jews. And he's talking about something else, someone else, other group of people, which, by the way, they are also part of. So Matthew 24, verses 32 to 35, that's the topic of our message this morning. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. Jesus is, after he spoke about all the things that Israel is going to go through, he stops in the middle of his teaching on Israel, and now he's telling his disciples, now listen, I want you to learn a parable from the fig tree. In other words, what I'm going to tell you about the fig tree is not exactly about a fig tree, it's a symbol of something different. It's just a parable, the fig tree. He's basically saying this. Look, when its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know. Say you know. It's not you think. It's not you guess. You know. You know that summer is near. So you also, when you see, say you see. It's not when you're taught about. It's not when you're hoping for. It's not when you dream of. You see with your very eyes. When you see all these things, know that it is near, not 200 yards away, not 200 miles away. Where? At their doors. Right there. So Jesus is basically telling the disciples, look, the fig tree, remember the fig tree? That fig tree that died, it's going to come back to life. And I want to tell you something. This generation that is going to live, it says, the generation that will by no means pass away, will. It says, the generation that will see the rebirth of that tree, that generation shall not pass away. So he stopped his entire description of the end times of Israel, and he's telling them, listen, I want to talk to you now, not as Israel, but you're different. You followed me, and you can escape this. And if you're going to be living through the days to see the fig tree blooming, that's it. That's the last generation. The generation question was always there. So I want to show you what has to be a generation that he meant. What are the other options that actually cannot really hold water? Okay, so first of all, we have to understand a generation biblically has always been the longevity of mankind. You can see it in Genesis, in Psalms, in Jeremiah, in Acts, in Joshua. It's always been so that a generation, as described in the Bible, begins at conception and it ends at death. The average lifespan of a group of people living at about the same time constitutes the length of a generation. In other words, you can be 12 years old here and 92 years old here. This could be an 80 years difference, but everything you see together makes you the generation that is watching those things. Whether you're 12 or 82 or 92, You are still the generation. It's a lifespan of a group of people. But then there's the view from the psalmist. You know, there's only one psalm that was written by Moses. Did you know that? One psalm, Psalm 90. Psalm 90, it's one of the oldest psalms that were ever written, and the Bible clearly says that a prayer of Moses, the man of God. And then he goes on in verse 9 and 10, and he says, "For all our days have passed away in your wrath. We finish our years like a sigh. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years. Yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away." So if we already understand that 20 and 30 years is not a lifetime of a generation, we see that according to the 2002 World Almanac and Book of Facts, the average life expectancy in the United States is 77 years, 74 for male and 80 for females. Wow. You can live without us, we can't live without you. But it's interesting, for Israel it is 79 years, 77 for males and 81 years for females. And the average life expectancy at birth for Israel is projected to be 82 in the years 2025. So, now we understand we're talking about anything between 70 to 80, maybe a little bit more. Anything. So what generation did Jesus, or was Jesus talking about? Now comes the best part of this message. See, some people think, some teachers, they think that when Jesus talked about that generation shall not pass away, he talked about Israel. But I find it very odd. Why? Because he's talking about a generation that are going to watch Israel. He doesn't talk about the fig tree. He talks about the generation that will see the fig tree comes back to life. Wow. So I believe it talks about the believers of the time. I believe that the most significant end-time prophecy is the rebirth of Israel and the rebirth of the fig tree. You have to understand, Israel in the scriptures has been described in 3 different types of trees: the vine, the fig, and the olive. Each and every one of them was a symbol of something else. The vine was a symbol of the spiritual privileges of Israel. The fig was a symbol of Israel's national privileges, and that's why the birth of Israel is a nation. They were still the people of God. He still cared about them. But there was no rebirth as a nation back in the land. So the national privileges are the fig, and the religious ones, the olive tree. That olive tree that had roots deep, the roots of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God says, "I am the Lord, and remember my name. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And in 1948, the nation was born. In 1948, the nation was born. And thus, we start the counting of a generation. But for us, we see a different fulfillment. You understand, when Moses was commanded in Numbers chapter 10 to make 2 silver trumpets. 2 silver trumpets. Why 2? Why silver? Why trumpets? Trumpets are a mean to announce the coming of someone. Silver is precious metal, but not perfect. And 2 is because I believe there's only 2 groups of people on planet Earth that God called them, "You are my witnesses." Israel in Isaiah 46 and the church in Acts chapter 1.
In our other videos, we talk about the rapture sign. That takes place on the 7th of Nisan, 5788. 7 means completion. So it's the completion of the first week of the new year. Then we have 5. 5 means grace. Salvation by grace. And then we have a 7, which is completion again. Grace completed. Salvation by grace completed. The church age is over. Then we have 2 8s. Those 2 8s are there because there's 2 new beginnings for the 2 groups of people that are going to heaven. The first 8 we show is the church. The church goes to heaven via the rapture. The second 8 is Israel. Israel goes to heaven through a different path, through the path of the tribulation, a path by fire. To know more about this rapture sign, just look at our other videos on the end times timeline. You will see that this sign is unmistakable. It's really unique. Thank you.
Now, throughout the history of Israel, the church did not exist, all throughout the Old Testament. But from the moment the church became a church, Israel was thrown out of the land. Israel as a nation was not back in the land. And only since 1948, the 2 coexist. The trumpets are sounding their sound. And that's why the Bible says, at the last trumpet, boom, we're out of here. I believe 1948 was a great sound of the trumpet. 1967 was a great sound of the trumpet. If I may say, 2018 was a great sound of trumpet as well. All I'm waiting for is the last trumpet.